Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Kilty. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Mike and Molly. Mike, I feel like this episode's got to be probably pretty anticipated at this point. I'm very excited. I know you're very excited. Today, we get to talk all about Exam 6.
Super cool. I know it's so funny because we're super excited for today, but this one is actually, I think, really cool. It's also a little bit different than what we usually chat about. Normally we're chatting about cool content, high yield content, strategy pieces. But now I think because this is a really unique situation that we find ourselves in, where it's not often that the AAMC produces new materials, especially new exams. When was the last new exam that they actually put out?
Free practice exam, I think that was 2023.
2023 around, I think it was an exam from 2022 or some parts of an exam that they put out in 20 or around. So it's been a few years since they put something like a new exam out. And we're always excited when they put a new exam out because this gives us the most insightful detail about the priorities of the AAMC, about where the AAMC is kind of orienting their exams, because we hear all the time from students, when they go in for test day, like, oh my goodness, test day was so different for X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the times, we don't get the chance to review test day exams, but it's opportunities like this where we can actually go in, take the exam ourselves. And actually, we've got a lot of things to kind of pick apart with this one to kind of give as much insight as possible to how the AAMC creates their exams so that not only can we produce better material on our end for Jack Westin, but also to let you know how you can best, prepare for what the AAMC looks like in 2025 and coming 2026.
Yes. And just as a heads up, a little disclaimer, we will not spoil any passage. Okay. So if you have not taken Exam 6, which probably many of you have not, that's completely fine. We will not talk about any individual passage, any individual question. What we have done is essentially go in and analyze the types of questions that are there. We'll share a little bit about our process. Actually, we collect very thorough data on all of the AAMC materials. We tag their questions based on, how in-depth they are, what percentage of what was necessary to answer them came from content versus the passage, right? And the degree to which each question pulls from both content and passage. And we also look at things like, how much experimental data is there presented across the 10 passages or the discretes, things like that. So if you have not taken it, do not worry. This is there's no spoilers here. We will not shift your score in any way, but it gives us a chance to really get into how the exam has been changing in recent years. There are definitely trends that have emerged that we could actually see when we analyze things that were released in the past. Like exam 1, 2, 3, 4 are definitely on the older side. They're not old, but compared to things like free practice and exam 6, they are an older resource. And we've seen kind of an evolution in the way that they ask questions. So I'm excited to get into that. And I feel like it's important to give you just the teensiest little insight into how we tag questions. We are not going to get into the weeds. As an MCAT company, it is part of our process to really get in and be very specific with how things are tested, right? In order for us to make our resources as representative as physically possible, we spend a lot of time staring at this material. And ultimately, not only does this help us make our exams and our Q banks and all of our questions more representative and accurate to what you'll see on test day, it also helps us build strategies. So all of our strategies in our course are built around this stuff too. But essentially, at a very topical level, we've got what we call P1 or P0, P1, P2, P3. P0s are, P is passage. P0 is no passage info. This is just a straight up content question. You could completely block out the passage and it would not have any impact. Okay. It's a complete, what we call pseudo discrete. Zero information from the passage was required. On the opposite end, P3 is everything came from the passage. Like literally you could show up and maybe have just like a very foundational basic understanding of science and critical thinking and you could still get the answer, right? P1, P2 are in the middle and they are exactly what they sound like. P1's a little more content heavy, P2's a little more passage heavy, but both the two in the middle require both content and strategy.
Yeah,
I don't
and
want to
we
get too in the weeds.
no, I know because I like you and I we've sat down, we have a fantastic content team. We sat down and we it was broken down. Like what
Yeah.
we've done is labeled every single question on this exam from every single section as either P0, right? A question that requires zero content to P3, a question that requires like all right, sorry, P0 is all content, zero passage, whereas
Yeah,
P3 is essentially almost zero content in all passage. And
yeah,
it's so interesting kind of when you break it down and kind of look, take the big picture look at, wait, what is the distribution of questions? Like what kind of what do they all fall under? And how that's different, not only between sections, but also compared to previous exams, right? We
yeah.
see a definite evolution in each of the sections. The main reason why we want to communicate this to all of you is because this is where our strategies are based out of. A lot of the times people are like, okay, are we sure this strategy works? I heard another strategy from like XYZ, Reddit, whatever, right? This is why our strategies are backed by this information because that's why we want you to follow them. Don't just take our word for it. We've done the research and this is how our strategies are reflected is in the data. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited to share them to even, and I think it's like we didn't even know what we were going to see when we went into exam six, but when we came out of it, I think Molly, you and I agree. We're like, oh my goodness, thank goodness for our strategies based on this data because like it really leans heavily to them.
Yeah. And
And
also, real quick, huge shout out to our content team.
yeah.
Like, thank you so much for helping us and helping our students and make our resources as representative as physically possible. They put in so many countless hours researching this stuff. Content team, if you're listening, we love you. Thank you.
Yeah, they work so hard, and I don't think get enough recognition. Like, and nobody, it's so funny how critical they are to the company, and just nobody really knows about them. So
They're amazing.
they
Now you
are
guys all
amazing. They're
know.
awesome. Now you guys all know.
Yeah.
But I think we can I think the first kind of thing I kind of want to touch on when it comes to this exam is overall trends across sections. While we have specific things, we're going to be going through each section specifically. We're going to keep it to the sciences today. We'll have a whole another episode for cars because that's maybe we can do that in the cars podcast, Molly. But we can talk about overall trends, but then we'll dive into Chem, Phys, Bio, and stick around for Psych Soc because that's one I know students have had a lot of opinions on about like, oh, is it more like cars, less like cars? So stick around for Psych Soc. We've got I think some interesting kind of observations from the exam. But when we talk about overall trends, I think when we saw the overall trends, I don't know about you, Molly. I wasn't kind of surprised when we saw the trend. Like it kind of really matched what we were thinking beforehand, but then when we saw the data, we're like, oh, I see. And Molly, what was that kind of overall trend that we saw?
Yeah, so I think a lot of students go into the MCAT prep thinking this is a content test and I
Mhm.
need a bunch of content. And as long as I memorize my physics equations and my psych soc vocab, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to get a great score. And we at Jack Westin, we've known for a long time this is very strategic. Do you need to know content? Yes. But is content alone enough? No. Right. So, one of the very specific things that we saw, and this was across pretty much every section, is a reduction in pure recall. That P0 or the pseudo discretes, where it basically you could cover up the passage and it doesn't change anything, those are on the downhill. Okay. Like
Mhm.
they are
Mhm.
decreasing pretty steadily. There were a fair amount of them in the AAMC exams, one, two, three, and four, but there are fewer and fewer, right? In our free practice exam, which is now exam five, by the
Mhm.
way. I think I said that earlier in case anyone's like, what? They renamed it this September. Used to be free practice exam. Exam five and six, we see a downward trend in the number of P0s or just pure recall questions. And we are seeing an increase in the questions that not just rely on the passage, but that actually require both.
Mhm.
So most students fall into one of two camps. They're either students that are really comforted by the idea that content will save them, and they approach every question by default as if it's a content question. Um, and there are also students that, and I fall into this category myself,
Mhm.
that approach it very much from the passage. And it's like, if I don't have to use my content knowledge, I won't. Like I will not. What we're seeing is while the absolute pure content questions are going down, what's going up is questions that really do require both. Okay, so both, not just pure 100% passage. Those were pretty stable. What we're seeing more of is you have to understand the passage really well, but you also have to apply your knowledge to the passage, which, in my opinion, those are the hardest questions because
Right.
pure content, you're not going to get there. Pure passage, you're not going to get there. If you have weaknesses in either your content or your passage understanding, you're going to struggle in this
Right.
type of question.
Right.
So
I
again,
love, yeah,
important.
so important. And I think that's such a good takeaway. And again, we saw this across all the sections. And I think this always calls back to what we're saying. And I still talk to students who keep on telling me, oh, the passage isn't that important, right? I just kind of skim through it or I skip through the passage to go through the questions. We are seeing, again, don't even take our words for it. Because again, we had the exam 5 now, which was on that trend. But exam 6, the fact that it even doubled down on these more passage-based questions, I think further reaffirms the idea that we need to actually read these passages because a majority of the questions, I mean, I think, I'm kind of giving a little bit of a teaser away. Like there was, I think, even in Chem Phys, I don't even remember if there was even three P0 questions. Like if there were even three in terms of passage-based questions, I don't think there were even three questions that didn't need the passage at all. Almost every single question needed the passage. Yet, imagine if we skip the passage for those sorts of questions, right?
Hmm.
You'd be completely lost. You have no idea how to even tackle these questions. And so we are seeing a huge focus on the passage, but what about the passage? Not just skimming through it, right? Because maybe a lot of people are going to think, oh, if I just, okay, I'm not going to skip the passage, right? Mike, Molly, I'm not going to skip it. I'm just going to skim through it, kind of pick out the kind of big ideas, any buzzwords there, and then go to the passage. But maybe that'll help for the P1 kind of questions that are like maybe just a little thing from the passage. But the P2 type questions, those ones are ones that you actually needed to understand what was going on in the passage. A surface level understanding was not going to cut it. They had a real big focus on experimental design, but not only experimental design, like the why behind the design. Like, why was this the way that it was? It wasn't just enough to just read it. Like, I remember when I was taking it, right? I was thinking, wow, they are really going in depth on these experiments and then asking really good questions on them. But I would just imagine if I didn't read the passage or didn't actually understand what was going on, I'm going to be honest, I would have been so lost for these questions if I didn't actually understand the passage truly.
Yeah.
Mhm,
It's again, it's getting harder. It's getting
mhm,
harder.
mhm,
A lot of students ask, is the MCAT getting harder? And to be honest with you, I think it is.
mhm.
It's not getting so hard that, you're guaranteed to fail, but it's getting harder in that you need to be a lot more intentional
I
about
knew
the
you
way
were going
that
to
you
use the word.
study. I think in the past, especially pre 2015, if
hmm
anyone's new, there was major, major changes to the MCAT in 2015. Over the past 10, 15 years, it is getting a lot more reasoning based. It used to be if you have a solid content foundation, you're pretty much fine. Like
hmm
the reasoning wasn't really that in depth. But as time goes on, the reasoning expected is getting so much more sophisticated that if you don't have a set of strategies, it's going to be near impossible to reach your fullest potential. I won't say it's impossible to succeed. Success looks different for everyone, but to reach your fullest potential, you won't unless you have strategies. Now, I want to clarify one thing because we're talking a lot about strategy here. I'm not saying that you don't have to look at content at all. Content is very important. And one of the main takeaways that we have is that while we need to emphasize how important the passage is, because most of us default to content, a lot of these questions that are becoming more common are passage and content.
hmm
Okay, they are both integrated. If you don't study content, but you lean heavily into strategy, you will still be missing questions because most of these newer questions that are kind of changing in terms of the trends, they are asking you to do both and to fuse them both. Now, we have specific ways that we can train ourselves to prepare for those kinds of questions strategically while studying, or while studying and strategically while completing passages. And those things we will talk about. But I want to be super clear. We're not saying content doesn't matter. It does. We Mike always calls back to when I said content is
I was really
necessary,
just thinking it now.
necessary but not sufficient.
Mhm.
And I think in the past, especially as someone who, you know, got a top score without really knowing all of the content, like I say that pretty often, at least when I took my test in 2021, that was very true. I think it's going to be more important if you want a top score to be comfortable with your material. You don't need to be an encyclopedia of
Mhm.
all things MCAT, but you need to have a broad foundation. And I would say the depth to which you need to know it, it's not extreme. It's not suddenly you need to know every fact, but it's getting deeper.
Mhm.
Okay? They
Mhm.
are testing a very wide variety of topics. The general trends for how many questions come from each subject and each content category, so the 1A, 1B, 1C, etc., that they have on their AAMC website, those are pretty stable and consistent. However, the actual topics within each one of those categories that are tested changes drastically every single
Mhm.
test. And rather than like, oh, you have one passage and pretty much every question is like optics, they're not really double or triple dipping very often with their questions. All of the questions nowadays are testing on a slightly different subtopic. So I just want to make that clarification. It's not that we're saying content doesn't matter. It does. It really does. But what we're saying and what we're hoping we're communicating is you need both.
Mhm.
More
Mhm.
of us are probably comfortable on the content side
Content
than the
side.
strategy.
Right.
So
And
just
so
a disclaimer there.
yeah, a disclaimer. And I think a real thing, kind of when I was taking this test, how they asked those questions were I had sometimes seen question types that I'd never seen before when I
Mhm.
was taking it. Like I could recognize like, oh, this is the same subject I've been teaching for 5 years. But after 5 years, I've done almost I think every single AMC problem, almost every single JW problem I probably at this
Full
point,
time.
right? Like like I was seeing subject areas that I taught many times, seen many times, but new ways to apply them. Right. And I think this is kind of the real, like, that was kind of the real clock for me when I was like taking, like, oh, that's why this is kind of unique, where it's like, it's the same subjects. Like, I don't want anyone to think, like, oh, there's stuff that, like, you're going to study that, you've never seen. It's going to be the same stuff that you studied, but you do need to go deeper, right? Like, a lot of the times we're just memorizing this stuff. Oh, let me just memorize HNMR, for example. Let me just memorize the kind of like overarching things. But no, a lot of times they're going a little bit deeper in terms of do you actually understand what we're asking you about, what we did? Because if you didn't, yeah, you are not going to be, even though again they're become more passage based, without that understanding of that content, you'll still be floored, even if you have a fantastic passage strategy. Again, it's going to be a little bit, and I even hesitate to say harder, because I actually think, and again, maybe somebody in the comments are going to be like, Mike, you're wrong. I actually think understanding a content area is a little bit easier than memorizing it. And again, and I want to preface this because while the initial workload to understand something is harder than memorizing it, the retention of it, the application of it becomes so much easier. Memorizing things is so stressful because I remember like if I memorize something and then I'm put on in a stressful condition where they kind of throw me a curveball, it's gone. It's gone. I'm mixing it up 100%. And so that's where I think a lot of the things that, I mean, Molly, you and I have been saying over the past, how many months are we doing this? 10 months? I think was really reaffirmed here where we can't just memorize this content. We can't. It is not a shallow thing. You have to understand it to be ready for the curveballs they'll throw. But we also, like you said, cannot ignore the passage, right? You do need both in order to really do well on this exam.
I
Mhm.
was reading a really interesting book on educational philosophy, actually,
Mhm.
and like student learning, things like that, because I'm a huge nerd.
Of course, we know
Um,
that. We know that.
and there was something that I found really interesting and really insightful that applies here, which was all about students that tend to memorize or students that have memorization as kind of the goal. And oftentimes when you're sitting down to study and you're learning a little more passively, and you're trying to figure out, how do I just stick this material in our brain? What often happens is students are really interacting with that material while it's there, and they're keeping that material in their working memory while they're studying, and maybe they're able to have that kind of aha moment briefly. But because they're being so much more topical and they're not diving in deeper, that information stays in working memory. It doesn't go any deeper than that. It's never transferred into long-term memory. So one of the things that this book was exploring is students that have the goal of memorization or that use strategies that are more so dedicated to memorization, they feel like they're getting it, and they feel like, oh, if I answered a question about this 5 minutes later, I could get it. But 10 minutes later, or, an hour later, or 2 days later, or on my test in 6 months, I forget. And they call it testing anxiety, or they call it, a silly mistake. It's not, because even if it made sense to you in the moment, it's literally just we're learning so shallow that it doesn't penetrate into long-term memory. It's never stored. Whereas the more you dig deeper, the deeper that memory will be embedded in your head. And even when you're stressed, because that memory has roots, because that information really ingrained in your brain through, comparing it to your life, applying it to the world around you, etc., those things stay with you. Even when, it's 6 months down the line and you're taking your test, or even when you're really stressed. So I found that super interesting. If we want to actually have knowledge to rely on when stress levels are high, when exhaustion is high, energy levels are low, and of course, this is far in the future compared to when you're learning it, you have a vested interest in diving in deeper. And I agree, understanding something truly it's not that it's easier to do. It's actually more exhausting in the short term, but I always think back to slow is smooth and smooth is
Ah,
fast.
mhm, mhm.
We've got a couple
Like
little
there's
catchphrases that
bouncing
we keep
around.
just
There's
trading
like
back.
anyone who's listened to the podcast regularly knows that I think there's like three, like intention, necessary, not
Yep.
sufficient, and slow, smooth, smooth, sad. Those are like the
Yeah.
three, like they have to show up at least once every
Every
episode.
episode, pretty much. Yeah.
It's like an Easter egg. But
Yeah.
hi again. And so if and I'm sure somebody's like listening to this and they're like, Mike, Molly, I get it. I'm with you, right? I don't want to memorize anymore. I want to understand, like, how do I do that, right? I think there's so many great resources that we've developed to help you do that. One, we actually did an episode a few episodes ago on memory and how to learn. It was like psych soc based, and we talked about using our psych soc strategies that we have to learn for content on studying. I think we did that a few episodes ago. Maybe we can link it in the notes because that one was a really, really good episode on how to actually learn, like active learning and memory. So that one was really good. But also, if you want to check out some things that are going on live, we have free trial sessions every single week. And I host currently one on the sciences. I just did one on fluids this last week, and students like loved it. Everyone loved. I mean, when you and I do that one, it's one of our favorites, 100%. We do one on enzymes where we don't just teach you to memorize the stuff, right? If you're like, how do I understand? Come to those free trial sessions. We host them on the website. You can count yourself in and you can see what we mean on how to actually understand rather than just memorize these equations like the fluids equations. We also have fantastic videos. Like, hey, I'm sure many of the people here probably have the AAMC video extension. People love
Right.
it. Like, if you want to actually see how to actually use your knowledge to apply it, check those out because that does exactly what we're trying to say, right? Combining that really in-depth content with that really good strategy. So there's so many resources that we've developed. If you are listening to this and you're like, I want to learn how to understand, go check out any one of those three things. You will see what we mean by there.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and more. I mean, we've got
We have so
textbooks, we've
many.
got video
Yeah, so
lectures.
many.
Dive in. If you want to fall down a rabbit hole of amazing MCAT resources, you go check out our website. And so much of that is either completely free or at a very, very, very low cost. So
Mhm.
if you're thinking that sounds great, but I don't have money to drop on a live course or I don't have money for private tutoring, come see us. Okay, we have things for everybody. And we really do work to make our resources incredibly accessible to those of us who want it and want to be
Mhm.
doctors. So there's something for everybody. Come find us.
Mhm.
As far as exam six goes, we've
Mhm.
talked a little bit about the general trends, right? Again, we're moving towards more content and passage based questions, We need to be really intentional about the strategies that we use in order to understand the passage effectively, not just at a surface level, but on a deeper level. And also with our content, we're not going to see as many really shallow content questions. They are more application based, they are more integrated with the passage. So we just need to be really intentional about the way that we practice and get lots of practice. Okay. You can't just study from a textbook and try a couple full lengths and be done. Okay. Please don't. We need to be working constantly in practice material so that we're learning how to apply things for the test. Now, with those general trends out of the way and engaged with, right? Because those are the major takeaways. Let's go section by section. I know that I know that Chem Phys is one of your favorites. So I want to let you lead us here with the Chem Phys. I love Chem Phys too.
I like Chem Phys, but I'm a huge Chem Phys nerd. I was actually a physics tutor, like instructor before I was an MCAT tutor. So I love, if people hate physics, but I'm like actually generally love it because it's so interesting. But taking this Chem Phys, it's so interesting because again, we took this exam, but then we also had our data people, our content team actually comb through it with a fine tooth comb. It was so interesting, the experience of taking it and then seeing the data. I'm like, how did that compare? And with the Chem Phys section specifically, I think those really melded well for me, at least. When I was seeing the data, I'm like, yep, that's exactly what happened when I was taking this exam. So here was kind of the big thing, kind of overarching things with Chem Phys, the Chem Phys section. Truly, these passages seem way more intimidating when we make them than they actually are. These passages will look like there's going to be some data here, especially the questions. They're going to be very, very intimidating. And if you are of the camp, like, I need to understand these passages, I got to prepare for those P3 questions. That sentiment is important, but I have to put an asterisk there. There's going to be some things in these passages, like maybe little terms here and there that you don't understand, and that's okay. Right? There's going to be relationships that are important to map. You see a relationship, you map that relationship. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out our passage reading strategy episode. But there's going to be a lot of these passages are going to seem complex, but we want to aim to understand to the best of our ability because these questions, what we're finding is there's a lot less P3 questions in Chem Phys. And by P3, what we're saying is purely passage-based questions, where there was actually a real big proportion of P1 questions. When by P1 we mean you do need the passage, but maybe you just need a detail from the passage, like a small piece from the passage. It's not all passage based, where it is much more largely content. And now, when we were kind of going through it, what we found though, while a lot of the times these questions were like P1, they just need a little bit from the passage, the questions themselves looked extremely intimidating. Oh my goodness, when I was going through some of these questions, they'd be like 4-line questions, which every answer option either has a whole bunch of data or like 3 lines per answer option. And a lot of the times when you initially see that kind of question, it's like, oh my goodness, this question is huge. Oh, this will take forever. But overwhelmingly, I mean, I remember when I was doing it and also when we were kind of studying it after, it was normally a very simple idea that it was literally like one simple idea that I was hitting on. And as long as you had that idea, right, the question was actually not, as long as you hugged that idea, the questions were not bad at all, right? But again, our mindset when we tackle these questions are, oh my goodness, it's 3-4 lines. I'm already thrown off. I'm going to give up on this, right? But what we're finding is while these questions are looking intimidating, as long as you have a good understanding of the passage, they are not that bad. They are really not that hard. Scary looking, not that bad, was kind of my big takeaway of the Chem Phys section.
Scary looking, not that bad is perfect. I think that's perfect. I couldn't sum it up better myself. It was kind of what I would expect. Like I expect it to look scary. Like it should. It's what I come to expect from the MCAT.
Right, from Chem Phys.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of how many questions came from like the different types or question types, I feel like it was pretty similar to what we had seen in the past. It's nothing major, except again that it looks scarier on the surface.
It does.
So just be aware of that, right? If it does look really scary, dive a little bit deeper, find that common thread from the passage into the question, find that, I always like to call it the clue, right? That will lead you back to the part of the passage that's being discussed, whether it's a relationship or a buzzword or whatever, and then use that. Okay. Again, when we read, we're looking for relationships and we're also trying to figure out sort of a mental framework for what you're given in the passage so you could figure out where to go back if you have a question that asks about something that you don't remember. So basically, core advice, it seems, is if it feels hard, just keep going.
It's
Just
probably
keep going.
it's I think there if I remember there was one student I worked with, and the big takeaway from a lot of our exams was always it's not that deep. It's not that deep, but not that deep to preface for anyone listening. The idea was we always make it harder than it actually was. It was
Mhm.
all we always overcomplicated the question where normally the simple answer is the right one. Like that might be an idea that like is like, oh my goodness, the MCAT being simple, no shot, no way. I think a lot of the times the MCAT's hard because we ourselves make it more harder than it needs to be, either by misreading the questions, trying to rush through the passage. And I think Chem Phys is a fantastic example where if you do not have a solid passage reading strategy, you're somebody that rushes through the passage and rushes through the questions, this Chem Phys section will seem awful. This Chem Phys section will seem unfair. But if you have a solid strategy, like you actually read the passage with intention, you do your question reading strategy, this section was again, I will even venture to say even a little bit easier than past ones. Again, don't shoot me. I know, but it looks scarier, but it's actually not that bad. But maybe you can if you take AAMC Exam 6, you can be in the comments and you can be like, Mike, you were totally off on that. I want to hear from you on your take. But that's just my hot take for the day. Where yeah, it looks scary, but it wasn't that deep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you just got to dive in a little bit. Um, I was going to say dive in a little bit deeper, but more so look past what's scary. It's not as
Hmm.
bad on the other side.
Hmm.
Jack always says for cars, which of course is different, but oftentimes the scarier, more dense passages have simpler questions.
Oh, I think that's true of the sciences. I think the scarier a question looks in the sciences, actually get excited because I'm like, oh, there's probably a simple answer to it. I think
Oh my gosh.
that's so true in the sciences too.
My favorite questions of all and my favorite passages of all are the ones that have four figures in the
Oh,
answer choices.
yeah.
I just know. And my favorite passage of all time is actually Biochem Section Bank Volume 1, Passage 4, the LRAP passage. It is my
Ah,
favorite. It's
yes.
so good.
Yes. Mm,
It's so application based. There are
mm,
a lot of P3s in there, lots of P2s. It's pretty
mm.
good. There's actually one just totally standalone pseudo
I
discrete question
deliver. I know the exact one you're talking
about the function of
about.
the liver.
About the
It's
bugs of the
funny.
liver.
It's a wonderful passage. It's very balanced, but the questions look so scary. They
Hmm.
are scary. Like there's one of them that has this thick question and then it's got four figures of the answer choices. It looks really hard, but it's actually not that different from what was just in the passage, right? Like
Hmm.
anyways, those are my favorite. They're not everyone's favorite, but if you get practice with them, I think it should feel reassuring when you see it.
Hmm.
It's like training your brain to do the opposite of what it naturally wants to. It wants to be scared, but sometimes the scarier it looks on the surface, the I don't want to say the easier, the
Hmm.
sometimes more straightforward it really is.
Truly.
It's
I
like
agree.
wearing a little mask.
It's like wearing a little scary mask, but then when you uncover, it's like, oh, it was actually something really simple, which is something normally we only find out in the review. But if we can turn that what we find in the review to on test day or when you're taking the practice test, that's what makes the whole difference. So 100% agree. And so that's kind of the big thing from Chemphys. That's the big theme. How about bio? Let's go shift to bio. And I know you love bio, Molly. Like if I love Chemphys, hey, don't get me wrong, I love bio, but I know Molly is that's her favorite section. So I'll leave it to you, Molly, to talk about bio.
I do absolutely love bio and I loved this biochem section. Like
Mm.
I absolutely loved it. I
Hmm.
loved it because it felt so section bank volume 1 coded.
Oh my goodness, you said it.
we
Yes,
we were
totally.
giving silly catchphrases to this, and Section Bank Volume 1 coded was one of them that we said before we
Mhm.
started recording this. So it was Section Bank Volume 1 coded. Basically, it felt very similar to that resource. And that, as I mentioned, that is my favorite resource ever. It is
Mhm.
very, very good at demonstrating how to blend content and passage strategy. Section Bank Volume 2 I also love. Okay, Section Bank is wonderful, but I do think Section Bank Volume 2 had a lot of questions on it. The passages were great, but a lot of questions that were a lot more like just content grabs, like
Yeah.
less. The passages were so sophisticated and I could think of so many really awesome, hard questions that could be asked, but most of the questions were more content heavy than passage heavy. I feel like section bank 2 for myself kind of missed the mark on the hard blending content and
Mm-hmm.
passage questions. And
Mm-hmm.
there, it's not that it's all low yield content, but it was just, I don't know, section bank volume 2 is not as much of a favorite for me as volume 1. So this
Mm-hmm.
felt just like section bank volume 1, bio, and I loved it. What
Right.
do I mean by that? I mean, the passages have a lot of steps in them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're going to see a lot of pathways. You're going to have to flex your pathway mapping skills for sure. Lots of variables that are kind of intertwined. Some complex research. There's lots of relationships given. The questions weren't too application based.
Mm-hmm.
I think same kind of trend. We didn't see as many straightforward content only questions. We also didn't see as many passage only. Okay, we saw a lot more of our intermediate P1, P2s, right? So either a good amount of content and at least a decent amount of passage, or vice versa, mostly
Mm-hmm.
passage with a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
content. Which again, those I think are the coolest questions that do ask you to intertwine. I do think that the passages looked hard, the same way that Section Bank Volume 1 passages look hard. But again, this is why we have the strategies that we have, right? This is why if you read a paragraph and it feels like, this inhibits this, which then leads to this product. And if this product is present, then this product will be upregulated and then this product will be downregulated. If you read something that you're kind of starting to see play out in your head, or it's getting to be a tangled mess, writing a little or drawing a little sketch of it, right? Of course, using abbreviations, using symbols, but trying to visualize something that's confusing, or dropping highlights for buzzwords and, anchors to sentences that have a lot of critical information, things like that. Those strategies that we teach are very, very
Mm-hmm.
designed for passages like this. So I'm
Right.
excited for those of us that are, engaging with these strategies. I'm excited for you all to take exam 6 because it'll give you a really good opportunity to practice and see how they apply and how they make things more helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't agree more. Like I remember taking it, like actually in the middle of the exam taking it and thinking, oh yeah, this is just like section bank 1. Not in terms of the actual like what was in the passage. Obviously, there are unique passages,
Yeah.
but a lot of, oh hey, here's a whole bunch of text and okay, here's a pathway, how this impacts this. Oh, here's an inhibitor here. Okay, map that out. And I can just imagine because so many students come to me like, oh, I don't map in my science passages. I just skim it and keep it in my head. I was just thinking while I'm reading, I'm like, oh my goodness, how in the world would I keep this all in my head? Like, I would not. So a lot of my maps were, yes, this impacts this, impacts this. All right. And when I had that map, these questions, and I honestly think these questions, if you had a good understanding of the passage, I actually think these questions weren't even as, again, I hesitate to say this, weren't even as difficult as Section Bank 1 questions can be. Because Section Bank 1 questions can be difficult. I mean, as long as you have a good understanding, passages are all doable. But I even think that on this bio exam, a lot of these questions were actually even, if you had a good understanding of the passages, even easier than with some of them, where I don't think they required as much of a, understanding of the passage as some Section Bank Volume 1 does. So I think the passage caliber, same level. The absolute passages themselves, same caliber. The questions, on the other hand, I think the payoff of our strategy was way higher in this exam because if you had a good understanding of the passage, like these questions were, again, I don't want to say laughable, but like they were like I finished like a half hour left on on that section. It was one thing where I was like, oh, this is like really straightforward because I understood the passage, right? So I remember, yeah, again, taking it like, oh my goodness, our strategy is really pulling work here. Like our strategy of understanding the passage really pulls work on this exam. And any any student who nowadays comes to me like, oh, can I just skip the passage? Can I just skim the passage and do well on these questions? Even before I was like, no, but after taking that exam, I'm like, absolutely not. Like you need the passage. Take your time as you read the passage. And these questions can take like 20 or 30 seconds each. They don't Rarely any of them need more than that if you understood the passage. So that's again, I'm here for like the hot takes. I'm like yeah, you know what? They're easy if you understand the passage, but now it's again, I always again, I want to asterisk on what I'm saying because I'm like really shooting loose on the cannons. Easy is a quote unquote term, but are extremely doable if you stick to the plan.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, as people who have been taking the MCAT for years, or not taking the MCAT for years, but studying it and teaching it for years, take this with a grain of salt. If you hear Mike say it's easy and it's not
Yeah.
easy for you, it
That's
makes
what I mean. That's why I was like, wait a minute, I should quote unquote that. Like it's but I think the same fundamental strategies, you do them, they'll be doable for you as well, I believe.
yes. Yeah,
Hmm.
so it's like it's more than easy. It's like if you are approaching this systematically,
Hmm.
you will systematically get the correct answer, right?
Exactly.
There aren't as many like head scratchers. If
Hmm.
you're using strategies systematically and you are approaching it in the same way and you are analyzing it as you read, the way that we talk about in our other
Right.
podcasts or in our courses, etc., it's going to feel doable. It's attainable. There's
Hmm.
less traps hiding for you if you are reading it systematically. So that's kind of what we mean.
Yeah. Again, thank you, Molly,
More
for translating for me.
straightforward.
I
There
that's
you
Molly's like my every see that episode's like, oh my, the translator, like what they're actually saying. That Molly's my translator here. So thank you, Molly, for
There we go. Okay, and that leaves us with one section left, and I'm excited about this one because everyone on Reddit
Hmm.
shares the same question. We
Hmm.
see the same thing bouncing around again and again and again about Psych Soc, our final section to discuss, which is Psych Soc is just like cars,
Oh,
which will be fun because what does that even mean?
that's such
What
a
does that
general
even mean?
term. Yeah.
It's thrown around constantly, and to me, that is so funny because the normal dialogue that students have with Psych Soc is memorize your terms
Hmm.
and you're fine, which to me
Hmm.
says Psych Soc is all memorization. When people say Psych Soc is cars, there's no content at all. It's entirely critical thinking and passage based. So it's funny to me how people say Psych Soc is becoming cars, but then still study for it like it's memorization only. So
Hmm.
it's this is going to be a fun one to talk about because is it like cars? Well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I know.
Yes
It's
and
like
no.
yes, no, like what is cars to you?
Yeah.
Like and yeah, when we've both been taking it and actually looking at the back end, like what our suspicions of it were true. And that is there's way less pure recall in the
Yeah.
psych social exam nowadays. Like very like the P0 or P naught way fewer. And again, as a reminder, P0 are those kinds of questions where you didn't even need the passage, it's just a pure recall question. While it wasn't that they were zero, but they were way reduced and they were much, much higher. It was like significantly more higher P2 kind of questions. The kinds of questions where you actually have to have an understanding of what's going on in the passage to understand or to know how to do the question. But P2 also means you had to know your content as well, really well, right? Because I remember doing that psych soc section and thinking, wow, these are really interesting applications of stuff. I kind of a similar mindset of the Chem Phys, right? And maybe this is just me. I didn't, if you have that feeling in bio, where it's like, oh, these are kind of really different. Like that was kind of unique. Bio was very much systematic, section bank one coded. Love that, right? It was like, we know how to do this. But Chem Phys and psych soc had these really like, oh, this is the same content I've been studying, but I've never seen the application of it before. So if I just memorized some of these content terms, that would have been game over, right? I remember some really, really interesting applications of all the theories that we discuss. But how they combine that with the experiment, with the theory that they discuss in the passage, was one where, yeah, you're not just going to be able to memorize and do well. You need to have a really good understanding of a psych soc passage. And I think this is one where that this is going to be a real change because I think that's what people mean by, oh, it's becoming more like cars, where, yeah, you need to have a very important, cars is all passage based. And psych soc, as we can see, is becoming more passage based. But it's not like cars where there's no content. Like you still need to understand the content, if not even better than what you needed to know before, because right, it's not just about like yeah, if I memorize some of these theories, I'd be question mark because I'm like I've never seen this theory applied in this way. How would I answer this question? And so yes and no when it comes to cars, like we said before. It is much more passage based, but the way that they ask questions about the same content, digs a little bit deeper.
And that's a common theme across all the sections that we've seen.
Hmm.
Again, you need to understand the passage really well,
Hmm.
but just knowing content on a surface level is no longer enough,
Hmm.
right? You have to understand how how content can apply to a new situation. That's always been the case, but it's becoming more frequently tested, more
Hmm.
directly tested. It's not just this idea in the back of our head of like, oh yeah, I should truly understand material when I learn it. Cool, great. It's a requirement now. If we aren't ready to do that, to apply our understanding to a new context, we're going to be really shocked by this exam. Like this is going to feel like 0 to 1 million in 1 second. It's going to feel really intense. So if you never, or if you don't get regular practice, it's going to give you whiplash. This is going to
Hmm.
feel really not so fun. Okay, so please get your practice, especially in this psych soc section. It's really important to have a deep understanding, right? And an ability to apply these terms, especially to your life around you. If you could do that and you can explain it in your own words what these things mean, and you could read the passage, you should be fine. Okay. Like I would, for many of us, and really invest in your passage reading practice in addition to your content and your understanding and your application. But one other thing to mention, this is true of every section, but particularly true with Psych Soc. Make sure to also bring your car's reasoning skills for the questions to
Oh,
Psych
so
Soc.
true. Hmm.
I think Psych Soc in general, the terms, there's a lot of overlap, and it's really easy to get certain things mixed up because the definition, if you just memorize one, sounds pretty similar to other terms. Okay, so it's already important to understand things on a deeper level. But I think identifying in Psych Soc which is the least wrong answer instead of which is the best answer, that's like a CARS mindset, right? Which is the least wrong answer, process of elimination. But again, being very critical and very mean with your answers, and kind of pitting them against each other. You need to do that for the Psych Soc section.
Right. I cannot agree more. I'm just thinking back to that psych soc section, thinking, wow, all right, I was like, of the four answer options, because this was such a unique way to apply that content, I'm like, I didn't love the answer. I actually ended up picking a lot of the times, but I was just, oh, everything else based on my content, I knew was wrong. And the only thing that was left was something I might not have loved, but there was nothing wrong about it, really. Right. And so
Yeah.
that's the kind of idea, like that cars question strategy. Like I'm a big fan of that kind of question strategy in all four sections. I mean, especially in cars, but I even employ that a lot in Chem Phys and Bio. But the amount of times I needed to do that in Psych Social, where I had to have a really okay, compare and eliminate. Okay, what's worse in Psych Social? I thought was I thought was a little bit shocking on that test because I'm like thinking, oh, I know this stuff well. But even if you know it well, combining that really intentional strategy with that content understanding was, I think, truly necessary for some of these questions. So I couldn't agree more. That question strategy of like eliminating what is worse and just choosing the least wrong is huge in Psych Soc. Hmm.
It applies to every section,
Hmm.
but it's good to keep in mind.
Hmm.
I think most of our findings were pretty widespread.
Hmm.
Again, relying both on your content knowledge and understanding and ability to apply to the passage. We do need to understand the passage very well. We do need to find that least wrong answer. And if things look scary on the surface, dig a little bit deeper because, you know, peel off a couple layers of that onion, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm thinking of Shrek.
I was literally just thinking like very Shrek coded. I
Yeah.
use it again. I use it again. I'm so
No.
hip.
Yeah, there's layers to all this stuff, okay? And I think this is where becomes very important to be reading critically throughout because oftentimes we skip the passage or we go straight to the questions or we skim it really quick and then we get to the questions and again it feels like 0 to 100 because we basically don't have no background and now we're looking at the question. You need to be learning in layers and approaching this stuff in layers. Okay, you read the passage itself and you kind of have an idea of like, okay, these are a couple major themes, scientific themes that they were exploring. This is kind of the understanding I have of the research. I'm thinking there could be questions about these things. And then you get to the questions and you've already kind of, you don't have to have written AMC questions on this stuff, but you already kind of have identified like, oh, okay, this was the information that might have been relevant. These are the kinds of things that they might ask me about. And if they ask me about those things, I know where to go, right? You see the questions and it's not as scary. It's not as jarring. It's starting to read or anticipate while you read. That will
Hmm.
help a lot, right?
Right.
Read this in layers. Don't expect yourself to be able to just glance at a figure and know exactly what the trend is. Same deal. You don't expect to glance through a passage and then know exactly what the answer is immediately after seeing the question. Do this in layers, one step at a time, be systematic, and you're going to be just fine.
Right. And I think having that system when you are experiencing that really scary passage is so important because I think when we don't have a system, we're so easily thrown off, right? You see something scary and you're like, oh, I have no idea what to do. Like, okay. But when you have a system, when you see something scary, you're like, wait a minute, I don't have to guess what I'm supposed to. I have a process. I know exactly whatever, whether it's scary, whether it's not scary, whatever have you, I'm doing the exact same things every time. And so if you're ever somebody listening and you're like, "Ah, I get really intimidated by passages, I get really intimidated by questions, usually the answer is not, oh, you need to learn more content. Maybe, okay, maybe you don't know content, but again, that's usually not the issue, at least in my experience. What the issue usually is, maybe you just don't have a process to fall back on. Maybe you don't have a system to fall back on. And so then your priority needs to be, what's your process? What's your strategy? What's your system in order to navigate when it's really, really overwhelming or scary? Because like we were talking about before, and this exam is a great example of, while it looks scary, a lot of them are actually really simple ideas, right? If you peel back one layer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was a little catchphrase that we came up to with while we were chatting with our content team, who again, thank you. We
Oh,
love you
great.
for all this
Mhm.
data. And it was like this really short, snappy little phrase
Mhm.
that I have to share. This exam and what we predict is going to be true of future exams from AMC, it's not really any harder than previous exams. It's just noisier.
Yep. Yeah.
I thought that
Yeah.
was so clever. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, there's so
Mhm.
much more noise. It
Mhm.
seems scarier, but it's actually a very similar difficulty level. It's a
Mhm.
similar task that we've been asked to do in the past. It just, there's more noise to cut through. I
Mhm.
love it. Not harder, it's noisier.
It's noisier. But then how do we cut through the noise? The answer to that needs to be the word that we use, intention. It has to be, you have to be so much more intentional about how you're going through the passages, how you're going through the questions in order to cut through it. Because, it's so nice to say, oh, I need to cut through the noise. But the actionable things that anybody can do today is start, using a strategy. If you are doing passages and you are not actually having an intentional strategy, that's one of your priorities, right? And again, I'm very extreme on this. Every passage that you do without practicing an intentional strategy is a waste of time in my mind, right? You should be practicing that strategy, building up. It's not going to be perfect on day one, but take the steps to practice so that on test day, when you see the noise, you know how to cut through it, right? If that's the one big closing thought from this exam, that would definitely be it.
For sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, could not have said it better myself. And this has been so much fun.
Hmm.
Um, I haven't sat and taken a full length MCAT in way too long. It
Oh
was
my
fun to put
goodness.
myself back in a
Yeah.
student's shoes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and really reconnect with, our roots, so to speak.
Back in the
Back
day.
in the day, back in our day.
Mm.
Yeah, so I hope you guys have enjoyed these, musings
Mhm.
from MCAT instructors. Um, I had a lot of fun with this episode. I feel like it's giving us a lot to think about in terms of how best to prepare for future exams, and how to take action, right? How to get practice, what types of things we should practice, and what kind of, what to invest in when we do take time to study.
Right.
So
And I think like this was also gonna be really insightful for our team and for all of us when creating material going forward. I would venture that I don't think anybody out there is investing the kind of effort that we are in studying these exams and creating material that truly mimics what the AMC is going to test you on test day. Right. A lot of the materials that people use is actually really, really outdated and
yeah,
not actually representative of today's test. And so I want everyone to know, like, if you are looking for the most up-to-date material, that again, people who are studying this stuff, taking the time and creating stuff, creating material for you to prepare, a lot of times completely for free. Check out our website, check out our Q Bank, check out our daily passages where we are really working hard to craft these passages to best prepare you on test day.
yeah.
Mhm.
And totally free.
And totally free.
Why
That's the thing.
not,
Check
right?
out the website. It's there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And definitely check out one of our free sessions as well, because we do walk through some of our free resources. If you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't know where to start, come see us. We'd be happy
Mhm.
to lead you through. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you're going to be excited to join us for the next one. We're going to hop back in with some fun science material, so you'll have to
Mhm.
stay tuned
Mhm.
for our
Mhm.
next discussion. But it'll be fun to then now moving forward talk about how really to dive in deeper and build that understanding, basically the things that we're talking about here,
Mhm.
how to connect that to science content. So
Yeah.
should be
So
super fun.
stay tuned. Check us out. Until then, wherever you are right now, whether you're on the road or you're at home cooking or you're studying right now, happy studying, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, everyone.